Well, hello, friends. My name is Noah, and if you'll just dive in with me, I want to get cooking. So, we're going to be talking. I want to talk to y'all about circumstances tonight, because honestly, I had such a poor idea of what a view on my circumstances for all of college, pretty much. Because the way that I viewed it was when good things were happening, and I know times were good. I had this idea in my mind that meant that I was healthy, I was just vibing with life, things were just good. And then when bad things were happening, it meant that there was something that I didn't understand. There was something I was missing that the Lord needed to teach me in this time. And it was just very over-spiritualized of I just needed to learn this thing. And the reason that I did that was just creating this false sense of control over my situations. And I can't control my situation. So when I had this false sense of control, what happened was I was filled with so much shame when I couldn't control them. When things were happening that were poor, it made me feel like there was something wrong with me, like I was missing something. And honestly, a pinnacle moment of this for me came at the end of my sophomore year of college. I just finished up a track season I was really proud of, and I was heading into the summer where I had this internship that I was super excited about, had been working towards. And right when that happened, I was diagnosed with depression, and a couple months later started taking medication for it. And that really shook me. I was 3 years into this walk with Jesus, and I was 20 years old. How was I going to be in a place where now I was going to be diagnosed with depression? How was that going to happen? What was so wrong with me that this is the place that I was going to find myself? And so I want to dive into Psalms 23 and see what David might have for us. And it starts with, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the path of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod, thy staff, they comfort me." And I love this psalm. It's a psalm of trust. From the beginning, from that first verse, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." It indicates that there's this idea that there are things that we are going to want, and yet it's going to be better if we trust the shepherd. You trust the Lord, that he's going to have something better for us. And David dives into two different circumstances, and he starts with the pasture, which honestly, I feel like there's more of us that are in the pasture than we actually realize. We just don't know what the pasture actually looks like. Because David is writing this in Israel, so it actually looks something a little bit more like this. Which immediately when we see that, we're filled with everything that we think it should look like, everything that we would want a pasture to look like instead of what it actually does. We see all the green that is not there, that we wish was, that we think that if it was totally filled with all of the green bushes, then we could find comfort and rest. And the still waters that it talks about, you know what still waters looks like in a place like that? It's muddy and dirty. It's not something we would naturally choose for ourselves. But what is so beautiful when we do find rest in this place, when we trust the rest in this place, is we're restored. And that word restored in the Hebrew, it also means to return to. It's the same root word that is used in the story of Noah and the ark when it talks about the flood waters returning back to the levels that they were before. And that's such a beautiful picture because I feel like there's so many of us that have either walked through or are walking through something that's so heavy, something so difficult that we feel like we're losing parts of ourselves. That maybe there's aspects of ourselves that we might actually like, but we feel like they're being crushed under the weight of everything that is happening. And the beautiful promise here is that there's a time that we get to rest when we trust the Lord, and he's going to restore those very things he created in us in the first place. But it requires us to trust in the pasture, even when it looks like it's not everything that we want. And then there's this transition verse where David is setting up the desert where he says that God guides us along the path of righteousness for his name's sake. And in Hebrew, someone's name described their character, like who they were. And the beautiful promise that David is telling us here is that it's according to God's character that he's going to lead us along the paths of righteousness, which is so good when we think about heading into the valley. Because the valley is the place where the sun rises late and it sets early. It's filled with so much darkness for so long. And then the darkness is where our enemies come for us. But the promise that we can hold on to in the valley is that he is with us and that his rod and his staff, they comfort us. And that word comfort in the Hebrew, I love Hebrew if you didn't know. The word in the Hebrew has this personal calling in it. The same idea that you can't help someone who doesn't want to be helped. You can't comfort someone who doesn't want to be comforted. It has to initially start with you realizing that you are in a place where you need comfort, where I need comfort, and then realizing that we can't get that from ourselves. The only place we can actually get that is the Lord. And the place that we can look for that in the Lord and his rod and his staff. Now, both of them have two different purposes when we're talking about a shepherd. The first use of a rod is for protection, which the idea of protection is something I didn't fully get right for so long. I had this idea of protection that meant that my enemies would never come after me. That like with the Lord by my side, my enemies just wouldn't even try. And that's just not reality. That's just not true. The rod actually, like the idea of protection implies that there's an enemy that is actively coming after you. But the promise is that you will walk away victorious. But the enemy knows that he can't win, but he might try to scare you. Might try to scare you enough to get you to run. And that's when the other part of the rod comes into play, because the rod was also used to keep track of the sheep. The shepherd would have the sheep pass under the rod so that he could keep count of them. And so he would know if one was missing. And then we get to the staff, which also had two purposes. The first, that had this hooked end on the staff that was specifically designed only for sheep to be able to pull them out of situations they've gotten themselves stuck in. So sheep, they would get caught in bushes, they might go down a path where the only way to get back to where they needed to be was to go backwards. And the shepherd's staff was specifically designed only for the sheep to do that job. And then the other aspect of the staff was to be able to provide gentle guidance once they were back on the path. And I know all that sounds like really cool, really beautiful, like, wow, I know a lot about shepherds. But it can feel hard of like, okay, like what am I supposed to do with that? And I hope you notice how there's like this little promise in there that's talking about the big picture of like, yes, on the other side of what you're walking through, God has something for you. But so much more of it is focused about while you're walking through it right now, this is how the Lord is with you. Because it can get so easy to feel like God is standing on the other side of your situation waiting for you. Maybe he's waiting patiently, but he's waiting for you on the other side of it. But the truth that we can see in this psalm, the truth about the Lord is that he is in it with you. And trust is difficult. Trust is every single day choosing that. Because like I was 3 years into walking with the Lord and I had this new challenge of depression come right in front of me. And the challenge was, okay, I'm in this space, what am I gonna do? Where am I gonna go? Where am I gonna look? And the beautiful promise that I hope that if you take away anything, that you have a God who is waiting patiently with you in there with a plan, just wanting you. You're not supposed to supply anything but yourself. He's not waiting for you to not be afraid. He's not waiting for you to not be anxious. He's not waiting for you to not be depressed. All that he's waiting is that you would just be quiet enough in a moment and be willing to just try to trust him. Just try. You're not going to get it right. You're not going to get it perfect. That's not your job. Just trust.